In the short term, the increasing prices of food products is alarming, and that's why we now have to, whatever we do, we must import. I think my sentiments about importation are clear, but it is an emergency situation that has been brought about by neglect of the agricultural sector for many, many years. And therefore, our production is well below our demand. Therefore, we must import. We refer to as shadowing. Is what they do is they shadow our fishing boats. We have immediately used that thing, that mechanism that I talked about. So now we can even immediately contact the Chinese government, and hopefully, though our counterparts on the other side can bring to President Xi's attention this.
And that was President Bongbong Marcos speaking with members of the media today. We'll bring you more of that interview later on in the program. From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time. I'm Sean Yao.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
Senators grilled PAGCOR officials over their lack of urgency in addressing illegal activities related to Pogos.
Though President Marcos says he is in no rush to ban Pogos for now, and he notes that their operations might not be worth allowing if the social cost is too high. Camille Samonte with the big story.
Dito lumalabas yung conflict of interest Because you're dalawa kayo Yung kumikita kayo on one hand, pero on the other hand, you're regulating. But your regulation, makita naman natin, pangbata. Mabagal pa.
That's what Senate Committee on Ways and Means Chairman Win Gatchalian said to State-run Philippine Amusement and Gaming Corporation or PAGCOR upon learning that it is still allowing two Pogo service providers to operate despite their involvement in a kidnap for ransom case. Pogos involve are Brick Hearts Technology Incorporated and MOA Cloud Zone Corporation, both of which are registered in PAGCOR. Senator Grace Poe revealed this during her privileged speech last month after a Chinese national was kidnapped to work for the said Pogos.
Dapat kayo na gumawa ng aksyon para mag-investigate, kick them out immediately. These are embroiled in kidnap for ransom. I don't think no amount of penalty will stop them from doing this.
Tama po kayo, Mr. Chair. Ngayon po, sisimulan ko na po na ayusin po
ito. Ano na ngayon? January 23 na.
We apologize for that, but we will really closely coordinate with the PNP and the NBI to resolve this as soon as possible.
Senator Gatchalian, however, is still not convinced.
Sino naman matatakot sa atin? Kung mabagal na yung aksyon, 500,000 pesos lang ang fine. That's why Senator Bato is absolutely correct. That's why none of the Pogo operators, especially those who are involved in crime, respects us. Because mabagal tayo.
For Senator Bato de la Rosa, Pogos involved in criminal activity should be banned immediately and their employees must be deported as well.
It's about time na we have to assert our supremacy over them. Palayasin na niyo yun dito. You don't have business to be here in our country. Ganon yung ugali ninyo. Sama ng ugali ninyo.
It was also revealed during the hearing that the third-party auditor of PAGCOR faked its credentials. Gatchalian said they discovered that Globalcom RCI doesn't have a business permit and its business address cannot be found. Gatchalian recommends to conduct a blue ribbon investigation on the PAGCOR's bidding process for third-party auditor. President Bongbong Marcos, meanwhile, admits that while Pogos affect the reputation of the country's security, there should be enough basis before the government permanently bans them all.
The problem are the illegal ones, not the legal ones. And if it's adjudged that there is a social cost, it might not be worth it. The cost might not be worth what they're paying in taxes anymore.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
In other news, higher credit card rates could soon hit consumers after the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas raised the interest cap on credit card transactions. The BSP hiked the maximum interest rate banks can impose on unpaid credit card balances to 3% per month. That is up from 2%. What this means is a whopping 36% per annum charge on unpaid card dues. As for other charges like the add-on rate for installment loans and the fee for cash advance transactions, the interest cap remains the same.
The central bank said this move is consistent with their objective of regulating credit card pricing without jeopardizing the long-term viability of issuers. This is in accordance with Republic Act 10870, or the Philippine Credit Card Industry Regulation Law, which gives the BSP the power to determine reasonable credit card fees and charges. The BSP said it took into account the upward trend in domestic interest rates as a result of high inflation. The benchmark policy rate has been raised to 5.5% from an all-time low of 2% last year as prices of commodities soared.
Here to talk to us more about the higher cap for credit card fees is Security Bank's chief economist, Robert Dan Roses. Sir Dan, good evening. Welcome to The Big Story. Can you put this in perspective for us? You have actually said that consumption, private consumption that is, will remain the main growth driver for 2023. What does this hike say about consumption?
That's right, Sean. Indirectly, it supports consumption as well. I mean, the use of credit cards, so it allows people to, get stuff, buy stuff without. The trade-off, of course, is that you have to pay that interest rate when you use that facility, and you only get charged, if you don't pay in full. So now it's not that drastic, in the sense that the rate is going back to a pre-pandemic rate. 3% may be considered normalized rates. That's still lower versus, say, 2008, when rates were at 3.5%. For context, we know that the BSP imposed that cap on all credit card transactions as a form of a temporary relief measure to ease the financial burden of household consumers from the pandemic. Actually promoted affordable access to credit, given that during that time the length of the pandemic was really uncertain. So in fixing the caps, the central bank actually took into consideration two things. One is the prevailing low interest rate then during the pandemic. Second, so that households can use credit further when the lockdowns were imposed and the duration was still uncertain. So like you said in the video earlier, the adjustment in the interest rate ceiling actually considers the upward trend in domestic interest rates, which were hiked because of high inflation and the BSP's efforts to counter the same through successive policy rate hikes. So it's actually a balancing act on the part of the BSP.
So are you also saying that this is more than inflation? The BSP is raising interest rates to address other things prior to the pandemic that were there. What other factors are exactly in play?
Well, fighting inflation indirectly, that's part of it. But like I said, it's a balancing act. Interest rates on credit card transactions are determined by the issuing bank or credit card company, and not directly related to efforts to curb inflation. However, central banks may raise interest rates as a means of controlling inflation, like what we saw in the past months, and that could lead to an increase in interest rates for credit card transactions as well. So banks and credit card companies may also raise interest rates independently to manage their own financial risks or to keep the boat afloat, so to speak.
Right. Taking off from what you just said, Dan, actually, Governor Medalla did say that this hike in the credit card transaction or credit card interest cap is also to help banks adjust to the 5.5% interest rate regime, which we are currently experiencing now. Can you tell us exactly how these forces are at play here and how they work together? Like you said, it's a balancing act because before the pandemic, we were coming from an ultra low interest rate regime around the world. And now it's the complete opposite, right?
Yeah, well, one is a signal as well, that there's some sense of normalcy coming back. Higher caps should help banks and credit card issuers cover the higher cost related to the handling of consumer transactions. That's one. That also makes funding available for long-term investments. For example, the drive to be completely digital, or near it, to strengthen, systems related to the overall operational procedure of financial institutions. So in a way, it's also it's one of the products that provides funding for projects to be implemented within the financial institutions.
All right, okay, so don't forget to pay for your credit card bills on time or else get slapped with a 1% extra interest rate. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights with us, Sir Dan Rosas, Chief Economist over at Security Bank. And motorists will have to pay more for fuel tomorrow. Gasoline prices will increase by 2 pesos and 80 centavos a liter, while diesel prices will be going up by 2 pesos and 25 centavos a liter. Kerosene will also be more expensive by 2 pesos and 40 centavos a liter. This will mark the second straight week of hikes for diesel and gasoline. The price increase comes on the back of China's economic recovery, which requires a higher demand for fuel.
After the break, President Marcos told members of the media that he will be having less foreign trips this year, even as he is slated to leave again for one this February. More details on that when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Fronts are American companies that have had to leave Russia. They now operate under very similar branding and sell very similar products, but ultimately they're not Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. The mass exodus of foreign brands and life under sanctions have changed things for the Russian consumer. A lot of people are now looking to China for goods they used to get from the West. In fact, it's so significant that Xiaomi Corporation became the #1 bestseller of smartphones in 2022, dethroning Samsung. Victoria and her sister are a good example of people looking to alternative supply lines. They're selling neoprene vests after companies like Billabong left the market. They identified a company in Guangdong province and are now selling to a growing cohort of water sport fans in Russia.
Введенные в отношении России многими поставщиками европейскими и американскими дали возможность россиянам начать свой бизнес. Он, конечно, более местечковый пока, но мы планируем воспользоваться этой возможностью и ее не упустить.
Some people compare the current environment to the Soviet Union and its isolation, but in reality, it bears much more resemblance to Russia in the 1990s, when the collapse of the centralized communist system led to gaping holes in supply chains and left it to ordinary people to fill in the gaps. An example from modern-day Russia includes Avito, a listings website that's now full of people offering to bring foreign-branded goods to Russia from abroad. In another example, one businessman is exporting gold from Russia to United Arab Emirates in exchange for goods. But not every sector is open to opportunism. In aviation, airlines are having to ground planes and cannibalize them for parts. And used foreign cars are selling for more than when they were brand new.
And for the Kremlin, that's navigating a declining economy, Victoria.
You're watching the big story here on One News. A bill creating the Maharlika Investment Fund has been filed in the Senate as counterpart of the one passed recently by the House of Representatives. How soon can we see this bill passing the Senate? Here's what we know. Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri confirmed that Senator Mark Villar filed the proposed measure last week. The Senate President said he intends to inquire with Villar about the direction of the MIF proposal, since the latter must have discussed it with President Bongbong Marcos in the many times they spent together. Zubiri admitted that he has yet to read the bill, but his staff informed him that it is more or less the same as the version passed by the House. As it stands, the Maharlika Fund bill in the Senate still proposes to use 50 billion pesos from the Land Bank of the Philippines, 25 billion pesos from the Development Bank of the Philippines, and dividends from government financial institutions, including the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, as seed money. Like the House version, Villar's version also prohibits government corporations from providing social security, contributing to the Maharlika Fund. But how soon can the bill pass the Senate? Zubiri said that with pressure from the President, the Senate may pass the Maharlika Investment Fund bill after the Holy Week break. Both houses of Congress resume sessions on Monday and will adjourn again on March 24 or before Holy Week. Sessions will then resume on May 8 and run until June 2.
And here to share his insights on the Maharlika Investment Fund being filed in the Senate, we have with us live via Zoom, Albay 1st District Representative Congressman Ed Salagman. Good evening and welcome to The Big Story, Congressman. Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on this bill being passed as early as after the Holy Week? That is remarkably fast, as we know, in terms of legislative schedules.
Well, it all really depends on how expeditious the Senate would act on the measure. And there are new developments, I understand, where an re-engineered version of the Maharlika bill has been floated around. Like, for example, securitization of government-owned and controlled corporation dividends, as well as the idea of having the private sector subscribe to this tax to an IPO, which would eventually make the private sector own and control the fund. And there are serious objections to this re-engineered version. For example, the GOCC's dividends are seed money for the Maharlika Investment Fund will deprive the government of a funding source to help the budget process and make it part of the General Appropriations Act. Ever since, traditionally and legally, the earnings of the GICCs, the GOCCs are used as a funding source for the General Appropriations Act. And I think that if we use the same seed money, we are going to deprive the government from using the same for purposes of addressing important measures like socio-economic agenda, like health, education, employment generation, food security, and basic infrastructure. Moreover, there is this dividend law way back in 1993, which mandates the OCCs to remit to the national government at least 50% of their annual net earnings. And the government would use that to support the General Appropriations Act. And this law has been there for decades. And if we use the dividends of the government-owned and controlled corporation as seed money for the Maharlika Investment Fund, then we will be depriving our people the necessary funding for basic services.
Congressman, you highlighted issues with the funding of the Maharlika Investment Fund. How about proponents of the bill saying that this will be privately led but government controlled? How do we balance mechanisms of that fund? And how do you think that this will bode for the country?
There is no rhyme nor logic for the Maharlika Investment Fund, which is akin to a sovereign wealth fund, to be owned and controlled by the private sector. The fund represents the wealth of the government, of the state. It should be controlled and owned by the state. And definitely, shares of stock in the Maharlika Investment Fund should not be subject to an IPO or should not be subject to subscription by the private sector to the extent that the private sector will eventually own and control the fund. This is a sovereign wealth fund. It should be controlled and owned by the government, just like the other wealth funds international.
Right. At its current state, both bills in the upper and lower chambers, Congressman, are looking to be the same. Would you be privy to what differences are in the House and Senate versions?
No, at the moment, I have not actually read the Senate version. What I know is that it is akin to the House version. But what is this new development that there is a re-engineered version of the Maharlika crafted by about 4 members of the House? This will not bind the House. If this is so, then that bill should be reformed and it should be deliberated anew in the House of Representatives to consider the re-engineered version, which I think aggravates the effects of the Maharlika Investment Fund.
Hey, Congressman, President Marcos has said that this should be designed according to the Philippine condition. Are you confident that we have, or are there enough safeguards, rather, for the Maharlika Investment Fund as it stands right now?
Well, I think investors will be hesitant to make a commitment because they have to wait for the final shape and figure of the Maharlika Investment Fund. And that is still going to have several possible revisions. And the investors will have to wait for the final version.
Arby, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts tonight. Albay 1st District Representative Congressman Ed Salagman. Thank you, sir. Right after the break, Senator Robin Hood Padilla stole the show during a Senate hearing on the Pogo industry. Find out why when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Upside down, and in doing so, shrank people's social networks. So how do you rebuild some of these connections? And why is it important to do so? Katie George, a senior partner and chief people officer at McKinsey & Company, is here now to provide a roadmap on how to strengthen these bonds in the workplace. What do we know about how the pandemic changed the way that people socialize and people's social networks?
Well, we know that the pandemic really devastated people's social networks, both in the workplace and outside. And the social fabric, particularly of a lot of companies, has been frayed, that we don't have the same social capital, the same degree of trust, the same kind of relationships to build on that we did several years ago.
Explain what you mean by social capital of a company.
So I think of social capital as the collection of all of the relationships that people have in the company that we draw on almost like a bank. And we often draw on the social capital to get things done, knowing that people will trust in the decisions we're making or in the good intent that we have.
What's the simplest or easiest way to go about building our social networks after basically ignoring it since 2020?
Well, I think there's lots of things you can do, both through virtual connections, but even more through in-person connections. Just being explicit about who are the people I'd like to build relationships with, who are the people that I want to give me advice, who are the people who could create opportunities for me. Too often we create networks of people who are great cheerleaders, but maybe cannot create real opportunities. And then how do I find ways of getting to know those people? Could be through just a very direct introductory kind of meeting. More often it's by finding a way to work together.
You are still watching The Big Story here on One News. President Marcos sat down with members of the media, including News 5's Cheryl Cosim, to discuss some of the biggest issues hounding his administration. Here are the highlights of their discussion.
Specifically do to implement for farmers to feel a change?
In the short term, the increasing prices of food products is alarming. We must import. It is an emergency situation that has been brought about by neglect of the agricultural sector for many, many years. And therefore, our production is well below our demand. Therefore, we must import.
Mr. President, about the Maharlika Wealth Fund, how could you ensure that the fund won't be used for money laundering?
You cannot use funds of the GOCC. Pera ng gobyerno, what will the government spend? It was a proposal. It's not something that we have adopted. Hindi yun basta o sige, bigyan niyo ako ng ilang bilyon dolyar, tapos lalagay lang na akong bahala na dyan. It's not like that at all. And in fact, even on our end, we will only deploy funds when there is a very specific project to be paid for. So money laundering just won't come into it.
About Erwin Tulfo, it was reported that you're gonna appoint him as one of your presidential advisors. If so, on what?
No, that's really not been part of the plan for Erwin. No, we had other plans for him, not as a presidential advisor.
But he would still be part of your administration?
I hope so.
Just a few weeks after, Coast Guard drove away Filipino fishing boats in Ayungin Shoal. What message does this give you? And what happened to President Xi Jinping's promise for a compromise?
Well, we haven't come to that compromise yet. And if the timing of what we refer to as shadowing, is what they do is they shadow our fishing boats. And so that incident happened right after I had returned from China. So we have immediately used with that thing, that mechanism that I talked about. We can even immediately contact the Chinese government, and hopefully, though our counterparts on the other side can bring to President Xi's attention this problem, and we have done that. But that does not preclude us from continuing to make protests and continuing to send note verbals concerning this.
Sa inyo po, paano niyo po masasabi na matagumpay yung mga ipinangako sa inyo ng iba't ibang mga leader ng bansa?
Yung mga biyahe, medyo babawasan na namin for the rest of the year. Kailangan namin i-detalye yung aming pinag-usapan. Kailangan na namin gawin yun. Hindi pa namin nagagawa dahil busy kami, biyahe kami nga ng biyahe. Pero at least meron kaming naiuwi.
Before we go, actor turned Senator Robin Padilla is still every bit of an entertainer in the Senate. The former action star attended the Senate hearing on Pogos, fresh off a Chinese New Year engagement. Ways and Means Committee Chairman Senator Win Gatchalian even acknowledged Padilla's Jackie Chan-inspired outfit. The panel was in the middle of discussing the alleged crimes being tied to Pogo operations in the country when Padilla entered the room and provided the short comic relief.
Ako po ay galing lang sa isang pagpupulong din. Nakita niyo naman ho, ako'y Kung Hei Pachoy. At habang papunta dito, nakikinig ako. Sabi ko, nung una kong nakita, sabi ko, hindi naman ako siguro kailangan dito dahil sugal. Wala naman akong alam sa sugal. Pero nung narinig ko na tungkol sa mga kriminal nito, kailangan ako dito.
Your thoughts on that outfit?
It should have been red, not black, diba?
Oh, as we welcome the year of the rabbit, but maybe it was part of the theme of discussing Pogos.
Yes,
why it was in
wow, you're reading deep. You're reading deep into this.
Happy Chinese New Year, by the way.
Yes, and that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, The Philippine Star, and Business World online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more in-depth analyses. I'm Sean Yao.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Gretchen Ho. Stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.